Welcome to this explainer for Grade 9 Biology, Unit 4, Lesson 1, The History of Life and Fossil Evidence of Change. Today, we're cracking open a pretty fascinating case file. We're going to dive right into exactly how life might have kicked off on this planet and the precise mechanisms that drive its change over millions of years. I am so excited to guide you through this because the evidence we're looking at today is just absolutely incredible. Here's our agenda for today's explainer. We'll hit our objective, dig into some fossil evidence, compare origin of life theories, break down Darwin's theory of evolution, run a quick misconceptions check, and then recap our key concepts. All right, Section 1, Objective, the briefing. So our goal today is really threefold. First up, we need to understand how physical clues actually reveal Earth's past. Second, we're going to impartially review the leading scientific models on how biological life originally emerged. And third, we absolutely have to grasp the fundamental rule that governs how life adapts. We're anchoring the whole shebang in the core concepts of the history of life and evolution. Let's get into it. Section 2, Fossil Evidence of Change, the Clues. We're starting our investigation by looking backward, way backward, at the physical evidence left behind by ancient organisms. Just imagine you're standing right here in Arizona's Painted Desert. What you're looking at isn't just a bunch of rocks. It's literally a frozen moment in time. Millions of years ago, a dinosaur walked across a muddy floodplain right in this exact spot and left those tracks. Over time, that mud hardened into rock, fossilizing the footprints. Scientists actually read fossilized evidence just like this to figure out exactly what lived there, what the environment was like, and how organisms have changed over the entire course of Earth's history. It's like a giant puzzle. Now, to organize all of those physical clues, scientists map them onto a geologic time scale. This scale brilliantly maps out Earth's history, categorizing it into major eras. You've got the Precambrian, the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic. Since Earth formed more than 4 billion years ago, analyzing fossils within these specific rock layers lets scientists determine relative ages. It helps them piece together this massive, grand timeline of biological change. Moving on to Section 3, the origin of life, the theories. Okay, so looking even further back than the dinosaurs, deep into the Precambrian era, we hit our next big question. How did biological life originally emerge from this primitive Earth in the first place? Well, scientists impartially explore two major models for the origin of organic compounds, the prebiotic soup theory and the hydrothermal vent theory. The prebiotic soup concept suggests early Earth was basically covered in a primeval broth. There's this famous experiment by Miller that actually demonstrated if you take simulated lightning and strike a mixture of gases thought to represent the early atmosphere, stuff like methane, ammonia, and hydrogen, you can produce amino acids, which are the fundamental building blocks of life. Pretty amazing, right? But then on the flip side, the hydrothermal vent theory shifts our focus way deep underwater. Discovered about 30 years ago, submarine ocean ridges have these massive sulfide chimneys. Astoundingly, these vents reach temperatures of 360 degrees Celsius. That is hot enough to melt lead. And yet, they harbor the building blocks of life. This primordial environment is powered by mid-ocean ridge volcanism and extreme chemical and thermal gradients. The theory posits that life started autotrophically down there, meaning organisms got their carbon from CO2 and simple compounds, using those intense deep-sea energy sources. Both of these are fascinating, testable hypotheses for life's chemical beginnings. Section 4, Darwin's theory of evolution, the mechanism. Jumping forward from those chemical origins, we need to talk about the crucial mechanism that explains how these living things actually adapted over millions of years. And that brings us to Charles Darwin's foundational theory, which revolves around natural selection. Now, natural selection is the observed phenomenon where organisms that are more fit and better adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and pass their genes on to the next generation. So the key takeaway here is that nature is essentially selecting the traits that offer an advantage in a specific environment. If an organism happens to be better camouflaged or just better at finding food, it survives longer, it reproduces, and those advantageous traits increase over generations.
All right, Section 5, Misconception Check, Correcting the Record.
Now let's grab a red pen for a second, because it is incredibly important not to mix these concepts up. A lot of people do. Natural selection is the mechanism. It acts on what is already there. It doesn't just magically create new features out of thin air, it works on existing genetic variations, and it can happen relatively quickly. Evolution, on the other hand, is the effect. It describes the really big changes over massive amounts of time, where one organism slowly changes into another to be more adapted to its environment. Think of it like this: natural selection drives the car, but evolution is the actual journey. Test your knowledge. The field exam. Let's take a quick pause in our investigation to make sure you can apply the evidence we just went over. Thinking back to those two primary models we discussed earlier for the origin of life, does simulated lightning driving chemical reactions describe the hydrothermal vent theory or the prebiotic soup theory? Take a second and lock in your answer. Section 6. Recap of key concepts. Closing the file. Okay, so if you identified the prebiotic soup theory on that last check, you nailed it. Simulated lightning acting on atmospheric gases was the whole hallmark of Miller's experiment for the soup theory. Now let's formally close out this case file by reviewing our required concepts. To definitively summarize our briefing today, first, fossils, like those awesome dinosaur tracks in Arizona, provide physical evidence of past life and environmental change, and they help us build the geologic timescale. Second, life's chemical origins are explored impartially through the atmospheric lightning models of the prebiotic soup theory and the deep-sea volcanic models of the hydrothermal vent theory. And finally, natural selection is the specific, fast-acting mechanism responsible for driving the massive long-term changes we call evolution. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Knowing that natural selection only acts on traits that are already present, what existing traits in the organisms around us today might natural selection act upon to drive the evolution of tomorrow? Really think about it. How will the shifting environments of our modern world shape the survival and adaptations of life in the future? Thank you so much for joining me on this investigation. Keep asking questions, and I will see you in the next explainer.